All right, welcome back to our contest conversations brought to you by the Word Guild. And we are doing these to help raise awareness for the amazing awards that the Word Guild helps to put on every year. And those are happening right now. If you have not had a chance to look at the website, we highly recommend you go over and do that because they are closing in 15 days at the end of March. This week, we have the honor of speaking with this past year's winner of the Harvey Mackey New Journalist Award. So I'm going to do a little introduction of him here for those who might not know him. Dr. Preston Pouteaux is a beekeeper, neighborhood enthusiast, pastor at Lake Ridge Community Church, and the director of Prestons Studio. He is an engaging speaker, writer, and curator of conversations about faith and neighborhoods, and the winning author of The Bees of Rainbow Falls, Finding Faith, Imagination, and Delight in Your Neighborhood, and The Neighbors Are Real, and Other Beautiful Things. Since 2015, his column, Into the Neighborhood, has been printed over 2 million times in weekly newspapers. Wow. Preston lives in Chestermere, Alberta, with his wife, Kelly, their daughters, Scotia and Ivy, and a few thousand honeybees. Welcome, Preston.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you. This is great, and I'm seeing a few faces that I recognize on my Zoom screen, which is very heartwarming. So welcome, everyone.
I love that. And I love that we get to chat with somebody today who has a passion for journalism, because that's a very unique calling. I know that you also write nonfiction and they sound like amazing books. But for the people who are tuning in today, I think we'd love to hear a little bit more about how you got started out in journalism and how your interest in that specific area and in neighborhoods came about.
Sure. Well, my passion is for the church in Canada. And as I fell in love with the church in Canada, I'm a church planter. So we start churches, we equip people, welcome people who are new to faith in Jesus. And I realized that I needed to broaden my imagination for my place and for the people I care for. And so that took me down a winding road that I actually didn't plan to go on, which is the road of telling stories, the road of hearing stories, and the road of kind of even flexing my own ability to articulate what is really important to me. And so along the way, I've just met amazing people, beautiful neighbors, and I just absolutely love my local church. And they've just spurred me on to the work and calling that I have.
I love that. And you can really see that passion coming out for the church and the need for us to be within community, within both our church and for those who are in our neighborhoods, both in your article as well as through your books. Now, the article that won last year was called Caring for Politicians in a Harsh Culture, and that was through Faith Today. Can you tell us a little bit, I'm going to read a little bit from that, but can you tell us a little bit about what inspired this particular story for you?
Well, again, love for my church and my neighborhood. And the backstory to it actually began as I began to care for one of our local politicians. The member of our legislative assembly, Bruce McAllister, was representing us at the Alberta legislature. And he's my neighbor, and he attends our church, and we just forged a friendship. And interestingly, in that friendship, we sat around my kitchen table the week leading up to a very challenging moment in the history of Alberta politics, a moment that he was right in the middle of. And I sat with him, but he didn't share with me what he was going through. And when all this crazy stuff in Alberta politics broke the week after, I began to see just the torrent of challenges that politicians face. And this isn't just any politician. This is my friend, my neighbor, one of our parishioners, and I just discovered this deep compassion for him. And so that began a friendship where we walked through all the fallout of this crazy political environment. And he was gracious enough to let me kind of tell that story several years later. And so I think for me, the article grew out of, again, this love for my church, this love for neighbor, and having the eyes to see what is going on. And in some ways, having the courage when I didn't have courage, having the courage to step forward and say, this is a really good story, and I think it'll help a lot of others too.
Yeah, well, why don't we hear a little bit of it? Because I found this beautiful, the way that you weave together what was definitely a story that you're taking from your own life, but sharing it in a way that really touches, I think, on people and how they might see politicians and understanding what they do go through. So I'll just read a little bit from the introduction to get people interested, and then they can go read the
Certainly.
rest over at Faith Today. It was around our dining room table, the air still warm with the savory reminder of dinner, that our two families shared our niceties. Stories and laughter, updates, and epic family tales as we, McAllisters and Pouteaux, cleared the dishes and moved to the living room. The kids went downstairs and we scooped some apple crumble into dessert bowls. But there was something else happening. I didn't know it, but Bruce McAllister, our beloved MLA, was in the throes of the greatest political decision of his career. Sitting in my living room and sipping tea, Bruce held his secret. At that time, nearly 5 years ago, I didn't know Bruce well enough to ask the deeper questions, and he didn't trust me enough to tell. As a community leader, he'd become celebrated for keeping conversations on the level. But now that he had become a politician, he more often had to hold his cards close. It is a strange weight we put on politicians when we ask them to hold it all together and carry their burdens alone. This secret was about to change everything for him. Those early family meals and the painful journey Bruce had to take in the years that followed forged between us a friendship that transcended the 24-hour news cycle, outlasted seismic shifts in government, and ultimately opened both our eyes to a troubling trend in Canadian politics. We now firmly believe politicians need care as much as nearly any profession in our country. Sadly, most politicians find themselves isolated in a polarizing culture that commodifies and dehumanizes politicians. Bruce experienced this firsthand as one of the people at the center of a pivotal political movement in Alberta's history. The weeks and months after his decision became some of the hardest of his life. In 2015, two major parties were exploring ways of coming together. A plan was drawn up and presented to several MLAs to bring unity to fractured politics. While the goal of merging two parties was good and ultimately achieved, the timing and approach was off. In a single day, 9 members of one party, including my friend Bruce, crossed the floor to join another. What they hoped would be hailed as a brilliant and necessary move to unite proved instead to be disastrous. These politicians were called the Nefarious Nine, traitors, and worse. One day, while Bruce was jogging with his dog before church, he ran past graffiti calling him Judas. From celebrated representatives to the recipients of the foulest vitriol, Bruce entered an experience in politics few of us will ever endure. It was devastating, and it got worse. In the following weeks, battle lines were hastily drawn in our community. People were either against Bruce or for him. Headlines and reporters were circling like vultures ready for a piece of news. The wildfire spread painfully close. In our own church, where Bruce and his family had long worshipped, he was met with looks and whispers. It revealed to all of us that below the surface of our community was a boiling political fervor. The story grew beyond Bruce. It became about much more. I'm going to pause there, but wow, it really does give us a look into this, the lives that politicians have to face and the amount of, unfortunately, horrible gossip and ridicule and things like that they get judged on so publicly, right?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, since this has been published, I have had several other politicians reach out. People have reached out to Bruce too, and we're starting to see just across the board how challenging it is to be a politician, to represent all of us in our various legislatures or in Parliament. But we have a view of them as being somehow other than us, and I think we are at quite a pivotal moment in Canadian history where politics really matters, where the health of the people who represent us actually matters, that these aren't disposable people, but people that we care for. And so I believe that the church in Canada is fully equipped to care for our politicians, to love them, to offer grace, to just be present. And this is a conversation that I'd never heard of before, and I was kind of found myself in it. But I really do champion this kind of vision of the church in Canada being for our politicians, irregardless of their political stripes, I think.
Wonderful. And I love that you're able to put such a positive spin on a situation that could have been seen very negatively. And as you read through your article, I think people will be very encouraged to see all the positive ideas and ways that we can work within our community to support politicians. And I really appreciated that.
Certainly,
So,
yeah.
I think there's some people who might be really interested in knowing how winning the Harvey Mackey New Journalist Award assisted you or encouraged you with your writing journey. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it was an unexpected phone call that I got first from the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, who publishes Faith Today. They reached out and said, you should submit this article. Now, you have to understand, Faith Today has a lot of writers, a lot of very good writers tackling a lot of very good ideas. And so little old Preston, a little church planter in little old Chestermere, Alberta, I was grateful at the very least to even tell this story in Faith Today. But I think it's a credit to Faith Today as a magazine, and I think some awesome trends in Canada where more voices are being heard across the board. And there's some really great stories being told. And so I think what it did for me is it encouraged me to continue writing and to continue to talk about what's happening in my little wee corner. But I've also then been able to turn around and I talk to a number of people that I think should be writing too. And they do what every good Canadian does which is, oh, shucks, not me. I have nothing to say. And the truth is that if you are authentically loving your neighbors, authentically following Jesus in a real place, you do have something to say. And I think that Canada is on the cusp of blossoming into new words, new language, beautiful stories, because I don't think that ego reigns supreme for us. We're all Canadians, so we always say something and then go hide under a rock. And hopefully more people will step out from behind whatever they are doing and say, this is a good God story and we should pay attention to it.
I love that. I think that's great encouragement for everyone out there who is wanting to find a way to start too. I think it's great to start with short pieces, either short stories or journalism. I want to open it up to, if anyone in the chat here today would like to ask a question, they can put their questions in, because I will ask those right at the end. So just as a reminder, I'm going to ask a couple more questions to Preston, but if you do have some questions yourself, specifically about his writing, his journey, about journalism, about writing nonfiction, please enter them into the chat and I'll make sure to look for those at the end. If someone were looking into starting to share their story, they were trying to come out from underneath their rock, they're trying to be brave, what piece of advice would you have for them around sharing those words, either through applying to have it in a journal or posting it on a blog? What would be some of your encouragement for them?
My journey has been one of writing for people that I know and love. And so I've been writing, this is my 5th or 6th year writing for my local newspaper. It's a small little local newspaper, but I've been faithfully writing for all this time, for these 5 or 6 years. It started when the editor of the paper had some other people writing for it. And he said, I don't like what these religious people write. What would you write? And I said, well, I'm also a pretty religious person, but I would write about how we love our neighbors and love Jesus. And so he gave me a slot, and we've been having fun ever since. But I think when we aspire to write for everybody everywhere, then our words don't actually have the universal impact that they probably could have. But if we write for specific people that we know and bump into and love, then I think there's something that becomes universal about it, if that makes sense. And so I'd encourage anybody that wants to write and tell their story is to write for your neighbors. My recent book was all endorsed by my neighbors, the people that live next door, there, and there, because that's who I care for, that's who I write for. But that's also the place where all the stories emerge. And so I don't think that I think Christians have this awesome vision of Jesus, who we follow, who cared for a small group of people in a specific place. And I think we would do really well as writers or followers of Jesus to care for a specific place and a specific people, and whatever comes out of that, we leave in God's hands, I think. So
That's great advice. I know even with writing fiction, they always say, don't picture a large audience, picture one person and write to that one person, because you'll be surprised how many of that one person there are who really need to hear your message. So I think that's perfect advice, and it transcends, right?
sure, yeah, it sure does. Yeah.
I had a question that was very similar to something that Melanie's posted. We know that you're a beekeeper, and we know that from your bio as well as from one of your books, The Bees of Rainbow Falls, Finding Faith, Imagination, and Delight in Your Neighborhood. Tell us a little bit about how bees have inspired this journey to look towards neighborhood.
Oh, mercy on everybody who has just logged in to hear Preston talk about bees. This could get way out of hand very quick. I think Leo Tolstoy's wife, they found her journal years later, and she writes in it and says, "Oh, my husband found bees. He can't talk about anything but bees," and so that is what bees have been for me. They have been my gateway into my neighborhood, my gateway into my garden, my gateway into growing things. They've really shaped me too in the way that I view beautiful things, the way my own imagination's formed for what good can happen in my neighborhood. I think God is at work in every neighborhood, but in my neighborhood, God is at work at this growing, small, tender pace. And my work as a pastor, like a beekeeper, I'm a neighbor keeper. I care for the well-being of my place and the people in it. And it's just given me an amazing imagination for what it is to be a pastor in a world that's trying to say, go big or go home, make big programs, change the world. Well, bees keep the world alive, and they do it in very small ways. And so that's been my approach as a pastor here, and the approach of our community is go small, stay home, care for what's right in front of you, and watch things grow over the long run. And so we definitely are. And things grow slow sometimes here in Alberta, but eventually you get to enjoy the fruit of it, which is what my second book has been about. So
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that idea of starting small, but the small can go on to change the world, right? So just like the bees.
Yeah. I think that it's wonderful that in every neighborhood there are followers of Jesus, and I think that if these followers of Jesus in every neighborhood across Canada just tended to the people in their neighborhood, we would continue to see the hand of God at work in our country. And so that is all I'm inviting people into, is to just be a good neighbor. And I take that from what Jesus invited us into, is to love our neighbors well. So
amazing. We have a very important question from Lloyd Mackey, who happens to be the Mackey of Harvey Mackey for the award. So no pressure with this one, but he likes your name. He wants to say that you've got a very appropriate first name. Come from a province where there is a potential to develop relationships in faith with politicians. Are there things that you would recommend to help politicians to collaborate across party lines and play down the seeming necessity of conflict and making enemies?
Yeah, I think my invitation to the politicians that I speak to is an invitation to be human, which might be a very strange invitation. But I think that the gospel of Jesus invites us to be more human, not to be extra human, not to be superhuman in the work we do. And the politicians that I found that have found their soul, that have found a way of crossing party lines, that have found a way to navigate the complexities, are people that are saying, hey, I have limits. I'm a limited resource. I come with all my stories, my passion, my love. I might even have a framework for where we ought to be going, but we can bring our full selves and our full story to the picture. And I think sometimes we ask our politicians to leave their story at the door, to leave whether it's their faith story, their pains, their anxieties, and they don't name what they're really after, what their hopes and dreams are for. And if they do name them, well, they're often quashed quickly in Twitter and news and all that stuff. And so I dream of the day when we have humans representing us, and we actually ask them to be humans, and we care for their humanity. And I think that, in the same way that I can sit around my fire pit with my neighbors, having a drink and talking about, like, my neighbors come from every background. I have every faith represented on this street here, and yet we can sit around and talk and even change our minds about some things. I think that that's possible in politics, but I think we as Christians can set the tone by inviting our politicians to be human and celebrating when they do take the mask off and show themselves for who they are, because actually in God's eyes they are beloved and beautiful. So yeah, I just want to thank the Mackey and Harvey family for this really kind award. I think that it's that sort of forethought to create an award like this that goes further than maybe you even recognize. And so thank you, because it's landed here on my desk and I look at it every day, and it gives me courage to continue to step into the work that God's invited me to. So thank you.
And I'm sure that they might be able to come on afterwards to offer their thanks too. I'm not sure if they're still here, but I think that's brilliant in recognizing that, to be brave is to be vulnerable, and to be someone who shares in a journalistic style, you have to be very brave to put yourself out there and your opinions out there. And wouldn't that be lovely if we can allow our politicians to show all aspects of their lives as well, in the fact that they're not perfect and it's okay, and that they're working through things. So thank you for sharing that. In the space of time that we have left, I want to make sure that people have a chance to find out more about you, where they can find ways to get copies of your books and read your articles. So could you share that for us?
Well, luckily I have a very unique name, Preston Pouteaux. And so you Google that and you're only going to find me. I think there's 40 Pouteaux in the entire world, and I'm the only one named Preston. So hunt me down. I don't know, the internet's a wonderful thing. But we've just created something called Placian Studio. Placian.studio is the website, and it's just in its infancy, but it's a little platform built in our neighborhood that's about discussing creating material to help us love our neighbors. Placian is the Greek word for neighbor, and so I'm wanting to shine light on Jesus' invitation to love our neighbors as a starting place for our faith and for our work in the church. And so that's a good place to go explore. But I'm just honored that all of you have stepped into the conversation, and I have no aspirations except to continue being a pastor, loving my place here. So feel free to reach out and call. I'd be delighted.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. It has been so wonderful to learn a little bit more about your journey, a little bit more about what you're doing with the bees and with the politicians and with your neighbors.
Thank you.
Wonderful. It's wonderful to hear what you're doing. If anybody would like to stay on afterwards, we will stay on for a couple minutes afterwards. But I just wanted to thank Preston again for joining us today, and make sure that if you are enjoying these conversations, to come back next week. We will have another one next week with the best book of the year winner, if you happen to know who that would be. And to make sure that you also, if you haven't yet, to make sure that you enter into the Word Awards before you run out of time. Do what Preston said, be brave, come out from under your rock and share a little bit of your story. I think that would be great.